Next, to pick up on some of these same points and expand on them, particularly I'm hoping with respect to the Belt and Road Initiative and the technology piece of what China's up to and what we need to be doing about it. I'm very pleased to introduce David Goldman, again, I think someone you all are very familiar with, the author of a terrific column at Asia Times, although it's under his nom de plume, Spengler. He is also the author of How Civilizations Die, and very active in the markets in MicroStrategy LLC, of which he is, I believe, one of the directors, managing director. Come on up, David Goldman, welcome.
Thank you. It's a great honor to be here. This is the blood, sweat, and tears version of what you just heard. I think we can describe what we've heard as Churchillian in its feeling, and by Churchillian I mean I refer to Andrew Roberts' discussion of Churchill's view of Asia right up to Pearl Harbor, and I quote from his wonderful new biography. Churchill said, "In the event of war, the Japanese would fold up like the Italians because they were the wops of the Far East," end of quote. Of course, then we had Singapore, which was the biggest disaster for British arms in all of history, and I believe if we underestimate the Chinese, as Westerners so often underestimate Asians, we're going to have a Singapore as well. I think the situation is a good deal more difficult. Think of the Russians at Port Arthur, the Americans at Pearl Harbor, or the Yalu River, British at Singapore, and so forth. I don't believe that China's economy is in nearly as bad shape as Gordon and others seem to think. There are dozens of firms who look at satellite photographs, count the number of trucks in parking lots of Chinese factories, interview people on the ground, and so forth. I look at these every day. And in general, the Chinese growth numbers are in line with the so-called physical Li Ka-Ching index, which uses electricity and other physical transportation, other physical parameters. China is growing at over 6%. By the way, the credit growth, if you simply seasonally adjust the numbers, follows a nice gentle trend upwards. You had a huge spike because of the Lunar New Year. There's no bubble in credit growth in China. It's actually quite normal, and they appear to have cut it back. Now, recall that January 6th, President Trump said China's not doing very well, puts us in a strong position. We are doing very well. Since then, China's stock market has gained 37% 2019 to date, which is double the gain in the U.S. stock markets. China's growth has actually come up. Ours has come back a bit. One of the main reason that U.S. growth has declined is that CapEx is way under anyone's forecast. And the main reason CapEx is down, according to David Wu at Bank of America, a number of other analysts, is because since no one knows where global supply chains are going to end up, no one is making outlay decisions. So it's quite possible that the trade war has damaged short-term U.S. economic growth more than it's damaged Chinese growth. I support President Trump. I applaud him for calling China out, but I don't think the tools that he's using will get the results we want. For example, early in 2018, the United States banned exports of chips to ZTE, virtually shut down ZTE. At that point, the Chinese government called Huawei and said, you now have an unlimited research budget to create substitutes. Huawei ran a crash program. As of December 2018, they were self-sufficient. In other words, an export ban would have no effect on their business except to raise their costs a bit. And a Japanese study just published by Nikkei reports that Huawei's handset chips are now equal or better than Apple's. So all we've done is give the Chinese an opportunity to make themselves more autarkical. The Huawei campaign has been, I think, one of the most sorriest episodes in U.S. diplomacy and history. As you know, the United States told its allies not to use Huawei technology for the 5G rollout because it would give China an opportunity for espionage. The result of that is even the British, not to mention the West Germans, Malaysians, South Koreans, Indians, and a dozen others, Poles, Czechs, Hungarians, have told us, no, thank you very much, but we're going to use Huawei equipment. Why is this? We don't make any of these systems. We used to. Cisco used to dominate the market. Cisco has $72 billion worth of cash in the bank. Huawei spent $72 billion in R&D in the last 6 years. The alternatives, like Ericsson and Nokia, make their chips in China. The Chinese can put backdoors into those chips as easily as they can into Huawei chips. So that didn't work out too well for us. To paraphrase Leon Trotsky, you may not be interested in industrial policy, but industrial policy is interested in you. How did all of this happen? The Asian model means treating capital-intensive industry as a public good. In other words, a chip foundry or a steel mill will be subsidized by low-interest credit or some other means, the same way that we subsidize a sports arena or an airport as a public good. This is the Japanese model since the Meiji Restoration. The South Koreans adopted it, the Taiwanese. The difference is there are 1.5 billion Chinese, and the impact of the Asian model on a country that big on the world economy is enormous. So the result is that all the elements of the modern digital economy, integrated circuits, laser-powered optical networks, sensors, displays, which were developed in the United States, every one of them, most of them with support from the Defense Department and NASA, are now produced overseas. America's shipments of semiconductors were 25% of the world total in 2011 and 10% in 2018, and will probably be down to 2% in the next 5 years as the Chinese massively invest in chip foundries, the Taiwanese leap ahead of Intel in terms of quality control. And in terms of the future, if you look at quantum computing, which is probably emblematic of the critical game-changing technologies, China is spending $11 billion for a single quantum computing facility in Hefei. President Trump just signed a bill into law in December authorizing $1.2 billion for quantum computing research in the next 5 years. So what is the point of the Belt and Road Initiative in this case? China has a demographic problem long term. We studied this at the Department of Defense a few years ago. The point of Belt and Road, above all, is to lock into the Chinese system 2 countries with a population of 2 billion people, to give China control of all the potential surplus of labor in the world, starting with Southeast Asia. The spearhead is Huawei and the telecommunications companies. Now, I spent some time as an investment banker in China with Huawei calling on foreign governments. And the message is, let us in, you'll be like China. We'll make you into a little China. First, you'll get telecommunications. Then we'll bring in Alibaba. You'll get e-commerce. So all these people in your hills are going to be working for Chinese commercialization. Farmers in northern Thailand are now getting text messages from Japanese food processing companies owned by Alibaba telling them what to plant based on big data weather forecasting and the Alibaba analysis of the food market. So once you bring in transportation, communications, you basically lock billions of people into a Chinese system controlled by Chinese companies with Chinese financing run by Chinese marketers. This is not all that far from us. Huawei is building the national broadband system in Mexico as we speak. Now, forget about the rest of the world. This is on our borders. So this would have gone much further if the Chinese hadn't been rapacious, incompetent, greedy, and corrupt in many of their dealings with any number of their prospective victims in the Belt and Road Initiative. But I don't think we can count on the Chinese not to correct their problems. The Belt and Road Initiative is a huge issue. So what do we do about it? This is the blood, sweat, and tears part. The trade tariffs are simply not going to cut it. Gordon is, I generally agree with him about disengaging, but specifically the way to disengage is we need to bring the entire silicon foundry business back to the United States. That will cost hundreds of billions of dollars. It will be disruptive and difficult, and big tech in the United States isn't going to like it, may not be great for their stock prices. But not to control our own semiconductor industry is like being a European power in the 19th century that doesn't produce steel for cannons. Secondly, we need to create our own Belt and Road competitive initiative in common with the Japanese and South Koreans and others, and offer an alternative to China. Chinese are hated in most of the world. It would be easy to offer them an alternative, but we're not, and we'll have to do it in size to be effective. And finally, we need something like Eisenhower's National Defense Education Act. Our biggest single problem is that China graduates 4 bachelor's degrees in STEM for everyone that we do, and the trend is going against us. 33% of Chinese undergraduates study engineering against 7% in the United States. 80% of all doctoral candidates in electrical engineering and computer science in the U.S. are foreign, most of them Chinese. They're going home, and what we've done in the United States is to train a world-class faculty for Chinese universities. So Chinese students are now not, fewer are applying to American universities. Unless we reverse that and build the talent at home, and I would also say we should be organizing a brain drain of China's most talented, we're going to lose. So in my view, it's fanciful to believe that short-term measures can destabilize this Chinese juggernaut. It's going to be difficult and expensive on the scale of the efforts we made to win the Cold War or the missile race with Russia or World War II. It's going to be difficult, but most assuredly we can do it. Thank you very much.